So, Gary, can you believe we're doing this again?
I can't believe it.
How long has it been? Like 7, 8 years?
Richard, can you
Jeez.
believe it's 10 years since the first episode?
Oh no, that makes me feel pretty old. I mean, I'm surprised that we haven't chatted in that whole time, even once. Haven't spoken on 7, 8 years. I mean, what have you been up to?
Nothing really. Nah, nothing much, man.
Same.
Nightmare.
Hello and welcome to Cinema Subculture, the podcast where we discuss everything strange, obscure, and downright messed up in the world of movies. My name's Gary.
And I'm Simon. What are we going to be looking at today?
Today, Simon, we're looking at the horror classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, directed by Tobe Hooper.
Tasty. You have a wee synopsis there for us at all?
5 teenagers on a road trip through Texas get stranded and come across some cannibals. Oh, sounds tasty.
See, that tasty, exactly. Okay, Gary.
What's great about the movie? Just a wee quick before we get into it.
There's
very little plot. Very little plot.
Very little. True.
Which I like.
It's quite simplistic.
Very simple.
Do you know why the kids are going to Texas? I guess. You know why they're there in the first place?
Oh well, the original thing is they're going to look for the grave. Is it the grandfather?
I believe so. There's been several exhumations of
people grave digging.
Yeah, so people stealing bones and bodies of people and stuff. So I think they're there to make sure that hasn't happened to the grandfather.
Because the character Sally and Franklin are cousins.
No, they're brother and sister, I think.
Are they brother and sister? Right.
I believe so. Yeah. You seen this film, right?
You're the guy with the eye for the details. The ear for the details. That stuff goes in my head.
I'm the one that's watched.
They're related somehow. That's right.
Oh, I think it's Sally and that Leatherface boy. They're brothers. They know sisters. So when did you first see this film, Gary? When were you first aware? I was trying to think the other day when I first became aware of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I can remember the first time I saw it and I bought it on DVD, which I think was the first time it had been released in the UK, whatever, since it was kind of on VHS back in the 80s probably. But I don't know when I first became aware of it. I feel like it was maybe through pop culture, like maybe references in something else.
I can't remember myself. It's probably I first saw it when it was on TV in the late 90s.
Okay.
I think when it first gets shown. But yeah, it's probably one of those sort of totemic horror titles that's sort of in the culture, like Nightmare on Elm Street. You sort of know bits about it, even if you've not seen it.
Yeah.
So,
I just remember it being like I tried really hard to think, I'm getting on now. I'm a wee bit older than that than last time we met, but I tried hard to figure out when I first saw it in comparison to other horror classics. Like I saw like Nightmare on Elm Street when I was like 5 randomly, so that's like the earliest I can remember of like a horror film. But I can't remember like if I saw this before like Halloween and Friday the 13th and things like that. I can't quite place where that is in the pantheon of my mind, but I just remember thinking that it wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. It was a lot more raw and kind of like not necessarily real, because I think even at that point I knew that it wasn't, it's not based, it wasn't real, but it definitely had that kind of low budget. I would later come to know this low budget kind of raw feeling that films like Evil Dead have, to a certain extent. But even that film feels a little bit more fantastical, whereas this feels quite grounded, especially the first half to 2/3 of the film. I just remember it just was completely. I guess I must have seen like Friday the 13th, or that kind of ilk, because that's the only thing I really had to compare it to. That I can think that it wouldn't have been something that I was expecting.
Am I right in saying you would consider this one of your favourite horror movies of all time?
It's funny. I would, but I really did wonder that. Recently watching it again to have a chat with you about it, I really did start thinking to myself, what is it I like about it? What is it that do I class it as something that would, like, I repeat watch a lot of horror films, like as I class them, kind of junk food horror films, right? Stuff that I'm kind of comfortable with and that I just want to kind of put on and kind of almost zone out because I'm comfortable with them. But Chainsaw Massacre, I don't know if I do that with necessarily. I feel it's a bit more like an event. It's like what this is a terrible analogy, but it's kind of like, it's like sitting watching something like Schindler's List or something like that. You kind of put it on when you kind of want to, you want an experience, if you know what I mean. Yeah, like, give an example. I was watching it like last year, middle of last year, and I had just got a new sound set up in my room, right, a 5.1 sound, and it was pretty warm. It was the summer, and the film's a really kind of sweaty, kind of warm film. I always find, I feel that you can almost see that on screen. Like it's like the heat resonates off the screen. But so the room was really warm. I had the window open. I had it up at a decent amount, decent level, and it gets to the table scene, and there's a lot of screaming going on. And suddenly my wife comes in the door and is like, "It sounds like someone's been murdered up the back of the village. You're gonna have to turn that down a little bit." But just because I get so lost in it, that kind of intensity and uncomfortableness of that scene in particular. So, I mean, I do class it as one of my favorite horror films, but it's not something I watch it has to be a kind of special. I have to be right in the mood to watch it, if that makes sense. As opposed to other films that are more trashy, I would say, and probably of less quality, that I could easily put on and not pay too much attention to.
Sure, yeah, you make a good point there in the sense that it's not necessarily a fun watch in a lot of ways, but I think that's why it appeals to me. I think in a sense, like, it's not really a mainstream horror film. I think a mainstream audience would be slightly turned off by it even still, because it is a film that it doesn't follow conventional horror paradigms or Hollywood paradigms, and it's a real assault on the audience, which is something I love about it. It is extreme, and it was a game changer in horror. I think one of the takeaways from rewatching it again is we're along for the ride in this movie, but it's not clear who we're with, you know what I mean? Are we with the victims, as in a traditional horror movie, or are we with the killers? Because Cooper does a lot of really interesting things with the camera and point of view, where a lot of the movie, the camera's like detached from the action in sort of a neutral position, and it's just basically Hooper saying, "You will watch this debauchery, but I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it. I'm just going to put you in this maelstrom of depravity and violence, and you're going to have to watch it." Because I feel the start of the film follows a kind of traditional setup of victims' backstory, etc. But we also get a lot of empathy with the killers as well, particularly Leatherface, which is quite unusual. A real interesting character, and sort of Hooper's depiction of a decline in industrial economy. This is quite subtle how he puts it in, but a sort of decline in industrial economy leading to this sort of decaying of the American family, which I really love as well.
You're kind of referring, obviously, there's the scene in the back of the van with the hitchhiker talking about, like, his brother used to work at the abattoir, like, and stuff like that. And I always remember thinking that, like, I'm like, wait a minute, that guy used to work at the abattoir. Like, that guy used to I don't think he's ever been out the house. Like, you
Right.
know, not the hitchhiker Leatherface. Like, I was like, how did that guy used to work at the abattoir? Sorry, as you were saying.
Aye. Then also really love Hooper's experimentalism in the movie, which is quite unique. I get a lot of influence from like European art cinema in the film, and I couldn't find any direct sort of evidence for that Hooper saying that he took influence from things like surrealist film or Soviet cinema, but he was a film professor
Right.
before he started
Yeah.
making films, so it seems like he was aware of that type of thing.
Sure.
In a lot of ways, it doesn't feel like a traditional Hollywood horror.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was looking at that.
It feels very dreamlike.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, you know, you look at like 4 years later, Halloween comes out, and that's a fairly low budget film, even though I think it was like about 5 times the budget of what Chainsaw Massacre was, but it just doesn't look like it. You know, like when you look at the actual texture or the shots in the film, it just doesn't look anything like, you know, a same type of film. Even though, as I say, that's still an independent film, Halloween, it still looks like a movie. You know, whereas this, I feel it's kind of got that kind of like proto found footage feel to it almost, where you're kind of like someone's just set cameras up in this house. Like specifically, I'm thinking the house scene where I can't remember the name of the character. You know, the girl with the red shorts, where it pans down underneath the swing. She goes into
Pam.
the house, and when she
Pam.
Oh, you can her name, do you?
Yeah.
When she goes into the house and falls into the living room, and then amongst all the bones and the feathers and teeth and everything, there's something just like, it's again, like I would say again, but like raw, this kind of unfiltered feel to the whole film, which, as I say, kind of feels like it's that kind of early, you know, like not fit as I say, not shot the way I found footage, but similar to the way that like Cannibal Holocaust looks. You know, even though that is kind of more like found footage shot, it's just got that kind of, we're not polishing anything off here. This is as stark as it can be, and I mean, it's kind of what you're saying there about Hooper, like making you kind of, again, setting up cameras and making you watch this thing. I always remember thinking, like, the opening scene, I was kind of unsettled because, so like my dad was disabled, right? And I just remember them thinking, holy shit, they just like chucked this disabled guy down the side of this bank, and like all bets are off. No one's like, no one is safe. You know, that way I just was like, holy crap, like what, I hadn't really seen anything like that. And then Franklin, you know, he's quite an unlikable character. Like he's quite abrasive, even to the other characters. So it was kind of like something I had just never seen before, and kind of, you know, brings this kind of realism and not sugarcoating anything to it. They don't feel like characters, and that's, I mean that both in a good way and a bad way. Like, we don't get much character development with them, but they just kind of feel like somebody were there watching.
Yeah, I think, and what's great is also the overall sort of aesthetic makes it quite unique, gives it a real unique vibe. I think that's contributed to his lasting legacy. You know, the 16mm grainy, the colours are really weird and kind of nauseating. I think also it's made with a kind of independent mindset that sort of marks it as a shift in traditional horror cinema. I like the fact that sort of there's no safe resolution at the end. It's sort of open. There's a real lack of legal authority that you might find in a traditional horror movie, where you have a subplot where there's sort of people trying to find the lost kids or whatever. I really love the scene near the start where you have the sheriff who's basically drunk at the graveyard, and there's this really odd camera angle where he's lying on his back and drinking, and then the camera's just on the grass, like filming these straight on his head. It's really kind of unsettling.
I never really thought about it before, but you're right. Like, you know, usually these films, like even like Psycho and things like that, they have the cops turning up at the end, you know, and kind of tidying everything up. Even these, like, you know, like Friday the 13th and Halloween, where there's, you know, umpteen sequels, and it's always left fairly open ended. There's always usually the cops or an ambulance turn up at the end, and you're kind of like, okay, things are safe now. Like, you know, the credits are going to roll or whatever. But this doesn't have that at all. And as you say, that kind of total like ineptitude of the authorities right from the
Yeah.
beginning, when these graves have been dug up and they're just there drinking and not really giving two flying fucks. But yeah, you're right. That's interesting.
I think as well that realism is what makes the film so terrifying
Mm.
in a sense as well, and that this is sort of an example of that shift in cinema, American cinema in general. A shift to realism. Whereas, like, I see a lot of parallels with sort of New Hollywood cinema. Whereas, like, Hooper obviously wasn't a part of that, but I think there's parallels in the sense that what was happening in New Hollywood cinema was like, right, the 60s dream is over, the hippie dream is over, the positivity of that is done, whereas the 70s was all about a kind of new cynicism and a sort of real life bleeding into cinema through shifting to independent filmmaking. And I think you see a lot of political elements in the film and subtly in the film. And Hooper's talked about how he wanted to sort of say, this is America. I think one of the tropes of 70s cinema is you get an idea of like a society in chaos, whereas the idea of traditional faith and authority figures was eroded in the 70s with sort of things like Watergate, ongoing war in Vietnam, economic turmoil, inflation, capitalist economies were kind of turned upside down, globalisation, as is mentioned in the film, where people losing jobs, technology removing traditional jobs as well. And sort of the idea that reality was actually more scary than any kind of traditional monster figure was, I think, part of the legacy of this film. Yeah, that was sort of a turning point in horror, wasn't it, as well? You had things before it like Last House on the Left, in a similar vibe.
With it
Rosemary's Baby, Exorcist, sort of moving horror into what would happen in the 80s, where horror was real people, in a sense. Yeah,
I think what you're saying there, but yeah, Last House on the Left is a really good one to point to, because it's kind of like the missing. This is kind of like the missing link, I think, between kind of. I suppose Hitchcock kind of did it with Psycho a little bit, but it wasn't quite masked monsters yet. I think you had the Michael Myerses and the Jason Voorhees, that type of horror that became really popular in the 80s and stuff, that were these kind of, even before they were supernatural-esque, they were like bigger than big, they were like they're monsters, they're literally monsters, whereas this is kind of like that. You've got Last House on the Left, and those are real people, and those are just real monsters. Those are like literally monstrous people, and then this is like that kind of apex, like a junction right there, where it's kind of like a bit of both, and they're very real monsters, if that makes sense, and they kind of just push to the very edge of kind of like of realism, I guess. Like, so this could kind of happen, but they're not invincible. They're not, you shoot them, they will die more than likely. That type of, they're not this kind of everlasting monster that the other ones became, and even like the Universal monsters and stuff before, where they always came back. This is kind of like that. I know there were sequels, but they've never quite done it that the same way, whereby these are just human beings, and that one happens to wear a human skin mask and wield a chainsaw. It's quite it's definitely that kind of link between those two types of horror.
Yeah, but then also on the other hand, I watch this film and it feels like, in a lot of ways, it feels quite dreamlike. It feels quite nightmarish. In a lot, it's a real story, but the way Hooper presents it is very frenzied. I really love the chase scene between Sally and Leatherface. It's very odd. It feels like something out of like Nosferatu.
You mean the first chase scene when she
through the woods?
Yeah,
the one through the woods. Yeah. It's like dark. It's got this blue tint.
Yeah,
and there's something quite. It's really strange. But it's really beautiful as well. It's one of my favourite points in the movie.
Yeah, and preceding that, like you get you know, Sally and Franklin walking through the woods, and just suddenly out of nowhere, probably, you know, everyone talks about the you know, the metal door, the screen door when he comes out and hits Kirk on the head with the hammer. That I think that's just as effective when he just appears and this like, boom, he's there, and it's like you can just. I think the fear. I think that a lot of cases in the filming of it, Hooper didn't really or they didn't mix much, you know, with Leatherface. So a lot of the actors hadn't actually seen Leatherface before they saw him in the film. So I think you kind of catch a lot, and again that lends to this realism. But as you say, like, the kind of the nightmarish, dreamlike part of the film, I think really it probably starts off around about there. Up to that point, things seem to be quite well presented as they are, at least. Where from that point onwards, and then through the chase and then the dinner scene and stuff like that, it gets lots of close-ups, tight shots on the characters that weren't there before. You know, this really kind of you're right there, and it's kind of frenzied, as you say, and intense.
It's interesting how Hooper sort of builds to like a real chaotic climax, because there's a lot of longer takes in the first half an hour, sort of a bit of a slower pace, building up the tension with that climax of that dinner scene, whereas like the screaming, quick cutting, really extreme close-ups right into Sally's eye. The weird music as well. Hooper made all the music. Well, you can't really call it music, just mad sounds. Really unsettling. Another factor that's making it a sort of an unconventional movie. And that's not even to mention like what's actually going on in that scene. That dinner scene, which is like crazy enough. But then it's presented in such a uncompromising, assaulting style. And it goes on for about 10 minutes, that scene. Just constant screaming and really weird camera angles. I love it.
Let's not forget though that as well that it's quite a dark comedy in a lot of places, and intentionally so. Like, you know, to the point where, as you say, that the what's happening in that dinner scene is kind of comedic, and it's played for it a little bit. You know, the actors are funny. You know, what's happening is funny. You know, the grandfather, like, they're trying to get him to hit her in the head with the hammer and stuff like that, and he's dropping it, and all that stuff actually comes across as quite funny. But it's then the way that it's shot, and it's funny to us maybe watching it, and it's maybe funny to those characters because that's kind of normal for them. But then it's this like focusing in on Sally and her experience and what she's been through and what she's going through, that's what makes it intense. And that makes it something really special, that scene. Always made me feel uncomfortable. I remember the first time I saw it, I just couldn't understand what I was seeing. If you know what I mean. I was wondering how long it was going to go on, because you say it goes on uncomfortably long, and again I think that lends to it as well. I was thinking when you were describing it there, it kind of reminds me now. It's been a wee while since I've seen it, but like, you know, the end of like 2001, you know, when it goes into that kind of the imagery and the music, you know, it kind of puts me in mind of that a little bit, where it's like you're like, how long is this going to go on for, and what's actually, where are we going? You know, that way, like you're not sure where it's going to end. So just when you were describing it, it's quite similar to that in a way.
I think another good point to mention though is what's unusual about the film. People come away thinking it's the most extreme cinematic experience I've ever seen. They feel like attacked by the film, but in actuality the violence is very tasteful in terms of what you actually see, which is part of the genius of the film. It's very subtle. There's no blood, or very little blood. And then for instance, like the scene where the Pam character gets put in the meat hook, editing is so good there. You don't see, like, you might see like the actual hook breaking the flesh. You don't see that.
No.
But the power of it is so good. Works so well.
It's so weird to say that. Now I watched it most recently, listening to Tobe Hooper's most recent commentary that he did, and gets to that scene, and even though I've seen it I don't know how many times, I was still thinking that you see at least a shot of between our shoulder blades, you know, like, you know, and you know, in my head it was all the 70s special effects could give us, you know, low budget, but it was there in my head. And then he was talking about the fact that there's blood strewn on the walls, but it's all dried blood, and none of it's hers, you know, and all this stuff that they did to kind of try and, you know, well, I learned this recently that he apparently wanted it as a PG rating. So they made sure not to, you know, he asked some people, how do we get this? And they said, well, you have to keep the blood low and things like that and all these things. So he says that we didn't put any, well, you'd be lucky if you found like more than a cupful of blood in the film. I don't know how he thought he was getting a PG rating, you know. It's kind of crazy when you consider the history of the film and you know, how it was kind of
how often it was banned.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you see it, but yeah, I think he just wanted to get it to as wide an audience as he could. But
yeah, from a filmmaking point of view, so good to and also to compare that to the later cycle of torture porn movies.
Yeah.
Whereas the philosophy was the exact opposite. It was show as much as you can and as much gruesome detail as you can.
Yeah.
But I would say none of those films have the legacy of horror that this one has. None of them are regarded as terrifying.
No.
As Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I sort of credit to the power of filmmaking there.
It is. It's really weird, like, you know, how you're, you know, like I watch a lot of, as I say, a lot of trashy horror films, and that includes some trashy horror sequels. Some of them to this film. And there was one done. I can't remember what year it was, but it was like Texas Chainsaw 3D or whatever. But it was meant to be a direct follow up to this, and it literally picks up right at the end of this film, and then skips you know, over a bunch of years. And you think most of it's kind of faithful looking when they're back in the 70s, but then when it skips forward like 20 or so years, they go back to the house and they meet Leatherface again. But suddenly again, he's this hulking behemoth of a man who's got, you know, like a 12-foot chainsaw or something, you know, and he's cutting people in half on screen, and you just think they just don't get it. They just don't get what made the first, you know, they try and they think they're doing, you know, try to keep the aesthetic in certain ways, but they just don't understand what it is. But I you know, you ask yourself, would something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with that level of you know, like, there's not very much graphic violence in it, that you see anyway, would it sail today? Would people go and see it? Could they make a sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that was, you know, at the same level? I mean, they made the second one, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and even it upped the game. That was Tobe Hooper, but
yeah.
But
in a way, that's a completely different movie.
Yeah, right. I know. I know. Well, it is. It literally is. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, it's maybe just you know, a unique moment in film history. It was just it was lightning in a bottle in a sense. I can't really think of any other movies I could compare it to.
Yeah, it's kind of
all the factors of production kind of added up to like just a total classic, a unique classic.
Yeah,
you might say.
Everything from production design, that house is like a character on its own. It's like so weird. Every time I watch it, I always forget kind of the house that they go to first. You know, the grandfather's house.
Oh yeah.
I just kind of. I remember we see inside it. If you asked me about it, I would remember we see inside it. But I always kind of forget it because it's quite blank and cold. But the family's house, it's just so colourful and like textured. And as I say that, like, you know, there was a quote from that commentary that Tobe Hooper said that the production designer, even the inside of the drawers were dressed. You know, like nobody ever seen them. Like, you know, Tobe Hooper didn't even see them most of the cases, but everything was done to make it feel like a real place, and I think that really comes across. And then the performances by the family as well. As the main kids, I don't know if there's much, you know, Marilyn Burns does a great job in that dinner scene, but I think when you hear the stories behind the filming of that, she was maybe just not pushed. I don't mean by the crew, but the circumstances of how it was filmed pushed her to perhaps that performance. But the rest of them, I mean, they're all like instantly recognizable, if you know what I mean, as characters, and like and quotable lines, and it's great. I like what you said though. Like it's a kind of snapshot of this kind of, and as I said, kind of the in between times, like just before the kind of that type of horror kind of blew up and lost its way, I suppose.
The 70s was like kind of a magical time. If you look what directors like Scorsese, Coppola were doing, and then they made their run of great films, and then they couldn't recapture that as well. It was just that perfect moment where independent cinema went mainstream, and then went back on the ground again.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for listening to the episode. This is the Cinema Subculture YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed already, please do like the video and leave a comment if you'd like to do that.
Okay, I've been Simon.
I've been Gary.
A whole family of Draculas.
It was a nightmare.
Sorry, I thought you were going to hand off to me. You're just taking it off.
Oh fuck! All right, you want to do it?
No, I don't want to do it. No, I'm fucking want to do it. You do it again. You have to do it again yourself now. You're an asshole. You're an asshole. You're an asshole.